4 a.m. car cleaning. I felt I had to share this encounter because honestly, I never thought I experienced something like this myself. Sure, I've read all the no sleep posts and freaked myself out over it, but this was different. This wasn't a scary monster or even a ghost. This was a close caller, so I believe. Some quick background leading up to the night in question. I'm graduating from university tomorrow, so I was determined to get an early night. I'd gone round to my friends for a wee spliff, but don't get me wrong, I'm not a pothead. It was more of a celebration. Anyways, I remember I had to take Mom to the hospital. Nothing serious, but she had to be taken and picked up. Then I remember we'd rolled the joints in the car. Disaster. She'd smelled and seen it everywhere, so I made a mental note to stop and vacuum the car. We have a 24-hour petrol station really close to us, but it's sort of on its own, as in there are no houses or buildings around it. I pull in and look over to the stop. They use a hatch after 12 and don't allow you inside, so I didn't need anything. It was just had a ticket over 4 a.m. and just had to be up at 10 a.m., so I just wanted to get this done and out of here. The vacuum machine was behind the coal shed, but it was well lit. I cracked on some music on my phone and got to work. 4 minutes of vacuuming, not bad I thought. No one else was in the parking lot except one white van, but the guy inside was yelling wildly into his phone. Not loudly, just making a lot of gestures, you know? I felt for him. Probably some guy who'd been driving all night, but hey, I cracked on with the work at hand. Then I looked over, again, and caught his eye. He looked away and I laughed. Love at first sight, I thought to myself. I was in an amazing mood. Then it started to get weird. The summer sun was already starting to rise, and the street lights went out, including those illuminating the petrol station. It wasn't that dark, but it was noticeably creepier, and I was keen to really get a move on. I stared over at the van and saw the man watching me again, still talking on his phone. But then something happened that I really freaked out at. I saw someone lean forward from the other seat and peek around the guy, then immediately slam themselves back against the seat. That's when I realized the guy on the phone was in the passenger seat and wasn't driving. I hadn't noticed it when I drove in, but I shrugged it off and set the vacuum cleaner back, ready to leave. I threw all my stuff back into my car and went to unlock the door when a voice said, "Excuse me." I nearly shat myself there and then. My heart was absolutely pounding, but I recognized the voice. The petrol station was a Spar, the same chain of stores I work in, and the guy who'd spoken was my old supervisor. He moved to the 24-hour store not too long ago. He began to shout at me for using the vacuum so late at night. The two guys in the van just sat and watched us, as if waiting for him to go away. Then he said something to me that made the whole situation get real. "I'm going to ask you to come inside. We aren't allowed to let customers in past 11. Even in the stores that open until 12, this was a big no-no, especially as I knew I wasn't doing anything wrong. I allowed him to lead the way, and the moment we were in the store, he put the shutter down. He told me he'd been watching the guys in the van, and they'd been sitting there for nearly 3 hours. Little did I know, my old supervisor saw someone get out of the back of the van, and as he described it, put a bit of masking tape across a few O's in their number plates, effectively creating a new one. I began to panic. Looking outside, I noticed the van was gone. After checking the CCTV, it was shown that they sped away the minute I was taken into the store. We called the police, and they examined what little footage was there immediately. They took the tape and thanked us for bringing it to their attention. At one point on the CCTV, the guy who got out of the back of the van turned to get back in, and it looked like he had a knife in his hand. I realize I sound dramatic, but this story isn't exactly thrilling, but I can't imagine what would have happened if my old supervisor hadn't been looking out for me, so I'm never vacuuming at 4 a.m. anymore, that's for sure. Horrific night camping. Let me start by saying, first post on the sub, so if I dickered up anything, please tell me and I'll fix it. Also for reference, I was a 19-year-old female at the time, still female of course, just a little older. I love camping. Anytime my friends and I came home from college, we would load up our cooler with beers, grab some gear, and go screw around outside. Unfortunately, when I was actually at school, none of my sorority sisters or other friends ever wanted to go with me, so I would often suffer withdrawals from camping. One day, the weather was way too nice to waste, so I grabbed some of my gear, hopped in a car I borrowed from a buddy, and drove to a spot that was secluded, yet within a safe distance to civilization that I could run and get help. Camping also creeps me out sometimes, but that creepy feeling is also somewhat of a plus for me. It's the same reason that people read these stories, I guess. It's it's fun to be scared. So I make a little camp and get a fire going. I hadn't brought all that much to eat, but I was enjoying myself, reading and looking around the area, that sort of thing. I got the feeling I was being watched, and I stopped dead in my tracks. I hear a twig crunch over to my right, and see a doe bolt from 100 feet or so in front of me. I laughed at myself and went back to the camp with the armful of wood I gathered. I kept freaking myself out, hearing sounds just outside of the ring of light cast by the fire. I always get inside my head, so I shrugged it off and kept whittling at a stick I've been messing with. Around 1, I decided to go into my tent and snuff out the lantern. I've been slamming beers in the most unladylike fashion and smoking cheap cigars. Another reason I like camping. I can act however I want, so I passed out relatively quick. About 2, I start hearing footsteps. They sound pretty light and sort of timid. I think to myself that it's a deer or other animal, more likely a raccoon, because I probably left some food out. I'm still on guard though. About 30 minutes of sleeping with one eye open, I hear a rubbing noise. Then the tent fabric is being pushed in a bit. I don't know how I didn't shit my sleeping bag, but I just sat there paralyzed with my kabar in my hand. I desperately wanted to thrust a knife through the tent fabric, but I was still holding out, hoping that it was some of my buddies from a frat joking with me. And then as suddenly as it had begun, it all stopped. I was starting to feel slightly more secure because daylight would be coming in about 2 or 3 hours, but I was sure as shit wasn't going to go to sleep. All of a sudden, at about 4 o'clock, I realized I should put my boots on so that if anything did happen, I would be ready. After having stayed up and keeping alert a little while longer, my friend's car alarm goes blaring. I freak the fuck out and run out of the tent. I got about 2 steps before something grabs me around the mouth. I open my mouth to scream, but instead, the person's pinky finger slips between my teeth. I've heard that people can perform superhuman feats when they have huge adrenaline rushes, but in my case, I just clamped down, and there's no way to say this without sounding ridiculous. His finger popped off. He screamed, pulled his hand away, with the missing digit falling to the ground. He took off running down the hill I was camping on. I took a right off quick in the opposite direction. I must have looked ridiculous to the people whose house I ran to. A little sorority girl in a wife-beater, boxers, and steel-toe boots. I also had some blood that oozed out of my lip, not from the finger, because I had also managed to take a pretty good chunk out of my own lip as well. I told them what happened. Called the police, got me some real clothing, and the man at the house made me a whiskey and coke. When the cops got there, they checked it out. The cops went to check it out, and when they came back, it was light out. They brought me back so I could get to my friend's car, and what I saw just made me more scared. Right next to the tent was a red gas can. He could have just lit me on fire earlier. The finger was also gone, suggesting he had come back. The kicker is they never caught the guy. So somewhere out there is a man sitting down to dinner, maybe alone, maybe with a wife and a couple of kids, and he's missing his right pinky! I can see you, boy. This happened on a Sunday night when I was about 10 years old, in the mid-90s. My family house was on a short street, a dead end created by a railroad track. We had a 3-story house, which was the farthest from the tracks, with windows on every floor, 2 in the basement. The stairs from our bedroom upstairs led directly to the front door, which connected to a closed-in mudroom porch, which also had a screen door and a glass door that only locked from the inside. Even friends and extended family would wait outside to be let into the porch. That's where the doorbell was. From inside the porch, you could see right up the stairs from the window in the door. Across the house, parallel to the front door, was the back door. Both had a large window in them. It must have been June because my older brother had a soccer game and only had a week of school left. I personally found him struggle on the field, and being forced to cheer while being eaten by bugs was really boring. And I just got a box set of Animorph books I desperately wanted to be alone with. After about an hour of reasoning and pleading, I finally convinced my parents to let me stay at home for the first time while they went to the game. They were only going to be gone for a few hours, and although we didn't live in the best neighborhood, our neighbors were close family friends, I'd be fine. Mistake. Usually before a game, we all go out and eat together, but since I was staying home, they ordered a pizza from down the street, my brother's favorite. I'd already been deep into my book, my first one, for half an hour when the doorbell rang. Pizza? I walked out from my bedroom and down the stairs to the living room. I got to the bottom of the stairs, and my father was at the door having a conversation with the delivery guy. They were talking about soccer, so I just decided to take the pizzas and keep on keeping on, Which was when I noticed the delivery guy staring at me intently. He was a middle-aged Caucasian with an accent, and he was smiling at me in a way I recognized. It was the same smile I had on my face when I told my parents I was old enough to spend the evening in the house alone. Fake, but convincing. I walked past them through the living room to the kitchen and threw the pizzas on the counter and shoved my face into my book. My father talked to him for a few more minutes about sports or something like that, and then closed the door. My family sat down to eat and chat while I forgot all about them, the food, and the delivery guy. Before they left, around 6:30 p.m., my parents wrote down all the emergency numbers, gave me instructions not to open the door, and headed out with my brother, and I waved them off, excited to finally have the house to myself, if only to read in silence. I locked the main door and headed up to my room to read. It was blissfully quiet, save for the sound of my dog's occasional barking in the backyard. I just finished the first book and immediately started on the next when the doorbell rang. The doorbell rang, and my dog lost his shit in the backyard. I was up in my bed immediately. I looked at my alarm clock for the first time since they left. It read 8 p.m. My whole family was at the game, and any extended family in the province was as well. No one would be coming over without calling, especially on a Sunday night. The doorbell rang again, and again, and again. I remained frozen in place, my book crumpling in my shaking hands. I, for the first time, was completely alone and terrified. A sly kid smile flashed in my mind. I thought I was so clever convincing my parents I wasn't scared to be alone, and then another smile flashed in my memory, the pizza guy. And then the banging started. Loud, successive bangs that rattled me, if not the house. And now from the backyard my dog was livid. I could hear him barking and whining at the back door. I wanted to call someone, but the only phone was in the kitchen, which involved walking right past the front door, trapped like rats. I panicked. I was scared to leave my room, to be honest, as my feet would be visible to whomever it was once I entered the hallway. But what if it was just a neighbor or an untimely Jehovah's Witness? I checked the alarm clock again and was surprised that only minutes had gone by, and my parents wouldn't be back for an hour and a half minimum. I'd have to wait it out, so I did. I got up as silently as possible, closed my bedroom door. Eventually all the barking, ringing, and banging stopped. I waited for half an hour, and then opened my door and crept out of my bedroom. Mistake. I crept down the hallway to the top of the stairs, trying to press myself into the far wall, as out of sight as possible. But all the lights were on, and I realized that it was obvious that someone was home. I peered quickly down the stairs and the window, looking through it to the glass porch door, and saw no one. Sweet fucking Jesus, no one was there. I tore down the stairs and ran for the back door and checked outside. Nothing but my dog, who was all too happy to run inside. I let him in through a crack and slammed the door after him, locking it. And I realized it hadn't been locked before. Mistake. I turned to the phone, grabbing it and about to dial my neighbor's number, when my dog started acting like he was going to the vets. A loud growl accompanied by a crouch, backing away. I froze and looked in his direction, then followed his gaze to the window in the inner front door, where inside my porch, past the front screen and glass door, stood a man I've never seen before, and he was staring at me, livid. I froze, paralyzed with fear as I looked at him, and I couldn't look away. He was tall, he was slim, and had bags under his eyes. His hair was shoulder length and unkempt. He lifted his hand and placed it on the window, and then looked down as he tried to turn the knob twice, but it was locked. I came out of my paralysis to seconds. His eyes left mine, and I moved quickly to the side of the wall that led to the basement stairs to block us from being able to see each other. Hiding felt good. My dog, still in the corner, inched towards me, low to the ground and still growling. I couldn't breathe. My heart was pounding. This couldn't get any worse. Wrong. I saw you, boy. I saw you. Open the door. My stomach nestled in my throat. I started crying. Trapped like more rats. I've never really had a fight or flight moment, only flight or flight, but there was nowhere to go. Back upstairs led right past him, or going down into the basement seemed even more terrifying. As I have to walk past the window in the middle of the staircase, I looked out into the alley leading to my backyard. I saw you. You can't hide forever. You have to pay. You have to pay. He screamed through the door window, shaking the door as he pulled on it. I thought he would just break the window and lock the door, so I descended slowly down the steps of the basement, going halfway just to put some distance between us. Mistake. I stood still, waiting, and then silence for a minute, nothing. Then the sound of the glass door and screen door to the outside opening and slamming, more silence. My dog straightened out, walked over to the top of the stairs, and then looked right past me and started growling. I can still see you! I see you, boy, and you have to pay! I jumped and turned my head. And through the window to the alley, I saw his face. He was laying on the ground, staring at me. I see you. I know you're home. I see you. Nope, bye. I bolted up the stairs, the inner front door, ripped it open, and locked the glass door to the porch and backed up into the living room, closing the main door behind me. Locking that too, I ran to the kitchen and grabbed the phone, unplugged it, and turned back around. He was at the door again. This time outside the porch, I steeled myself and ran up the stairs with the phone, dog in tow, to my parents' bedroom, which was the only room with a working phone jack and a lock on their door. And the doorbell started to ring. I closed and locked her door behind me, left her lights off, and plugged in the phone. I dialed my neighbors, got their answering machine. I dialed again, machine. Every ring of the phone was matched by a ring of the doorbell. I called them over and over, finally whispering a message. Tom, it's Kevin. A man is trying to get into the house and I'm alone. I peered out of my parents' window. I looked down into the front yard. He was still there, pacing, walking up and down the stairs, looking into the windows, walking out of sight as he entered the alleyway and then back into the front. I noticed my neighbor's car wasn't there. They weren't even home. And it still hadn't occurred to me to call 911, so I hunkered down and waited with my dog, waiting from the corner of the window. He walked back up the porch, tried the door, and then the doorbell went off a few more times. And then he walked down the stairs and headed back out onto the street. He walked a bit down the sidewalk away from the dead end towards the main road and then stopped, and then turned around, walking back towards the house. He stopped again and looked up, directly at the window I was looking through, but the room was dark. He couldn't see me. Instead of turning back around, he continued walking down the street and crossed the street. When he reached the train tracks, he walked back up to the other sidewalk, staring at my house all the while, and kept going until he reached the main intersection and turned the corner. I stood in the corner of the window, watching the street for what seemed like hours, until my parents' car pulled up in front of the house, along with the neighbor's car. They all got out and my mother headed towards the house, while my father started chatting with the neighbor's husband. Those fuckers had left me with an emergency contact number for somebody that wasn't going to be home because they were going out together. I unlocked the door and booked it downstairs, instantly crying with relief as I unlocked the inner door and then the glass porch door. I recounted the night's events to my parents in the kitchen through tears, and they had just started to calm me down. And that's when the doorbell rang. I started to shake and cry again, and my father burst out his seat and barreled towards the door and swung it open, and there he was, the man. He stood there smiling, a disgusting smile, and I immediately took off down into the basement. My mother was right behind me. I heard my father and him arguing loudly for a few minutes, and then my father slamming the door. My father called my mother and I back upstairs, and then after I made him promise the man was gone, I walked up and into the kitchen. My father sat me down and explained the situation. Earlier, my father hadn't had enough cash on him for the pizzas. He told the delivery guy that he would be back in 4 hours, but had to make the game and didn't have the time to get more cash. The delivery guy agreed, wished my brother good luck in his game, and then had passed the message on to the guy who would be working the closing night shift. That delivery guy had misunderstood, thinking that he was to return immediately and collect payment. He explained it all to my father, as if he rang the doorbell a few times and then had left, now that he had been circling the house terrifying me for over an hour. He told my father he wasn't sure if anyone was home, so he looked around back, but only saw my dog, so he left, only returning, coincidentally, minutes after my parents returned, armed with a convincing story. Kids have such an imagination. Sorry that frightened him. I called bullshit, but my parents didn't believe me. Suffice it to say, I brought my books with me to every soccer game after that.